Okay, so you want to know how your food is connected to the sun.
Right.
Well, that's exactly what we're diving into today. Whether you're gearing up for the UPSC Environment and Ecology section, or you just love learning about the world around us, this deep dive is for you. And before we jump in, do us a favor and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell icon so you don't miss out on any future deep dives.
Sounds good.
Awesome. Now let's get into it. We're talking ecosystems today, folks. These intricate webs of life are all around us, and we're going to unlock the secrets of how energy flows through them. Think of it like understanding nature's power grid, how energy is made, transferred, and ultimately powers every living thing.
That's a great analogy.
Right. And we'll be using nv1.pdf as our guide for this deep dive. So let's start at the beginning. Where does all this energy come from?
It all starts with a giant blazing star.
You talking about the sun?
Exactly, the sun.
I mean, it makes sense, but how does the sun's energy, like, end up powering a tiger's roar, you know?
Well, the sun's like this massive nuclear reactor constantly churning out energy, but it's in the form of light and heat, not exactly something a tiger can directly use.
Right.
And that's where the magic of photosynthesis comes in.
Ah, photosynthesis. I remember learning about that back in school. Plants use sunlight to make food. So they're kind of like nature's solar panels.
Exactly. They're like little energy factories turning sunlight into fuel for life. Plants, along with some algae and bacteria, can capture sunlight and convert it into chemical energy.
Okay, so that's how the sun's energy enters the system.
Yeah.
But how does it get to, say, a tiger? Does a tiger nibble on leaves?
Not quite. The transfer of energy in an ecosystem is like a relay race. It's passed from one organism to the next. We call these steps trophic levels, or basically feeding levels.
Trophic levels. Sounds a bit sciencey. Can you break that down a bit?
Sure, think of it as a food chain, like a hierarchical ladder.
Okay, I'm picturing a ladder now.
At the bottom of the ladder, we have the producers. Those amazing plants, algae, and bacteria we were just talking about, they form the base, using sunlight to create their own food.
Okay, so they're the self-sufficient ones, the foundation of the whole system. Got it. Who's next on this ladder?
Next up are the primary consumers, the herbivores. These are the plant eaters, like deer, rabbits, or grasshoppers. They get their energy by, well, munching on the producers.
So the energy from the sun, captured by the plants, gets passed on to the herbivores when they eat those plants, like a direct energy transfer. So then what about the carnivores, the meat eaters? Where do they fit in?
Carnivores occupy the next rung, the secondary consumers. And they get their energy by, as you might guess, eating the herbivores. A lion taking down a zebra, or a hawk swooping down to catch a rabbit. That's energy being transferred from one trophic level to the next.
It's like a chain reaction, starting with the sun and moving up through the food chain. Okay, it's all starting to click now. But what happens to all the dead stuff? You know, the fallen leaves, the animal carcasses. Is that energy just gone?
That's where the, you could say, unsung heroes of the ecosystem come in. The decomposers and detritivores. Think of them as nature's recycling crew.
Okay, so they're the cleanup crew. But how do they fit into this whole energy flow thing?
Well, let's start with detritivores. They're like earthworms and dung beetles. They literally consume dead organic matter, breaking it down into smaller pieces.
Ah, so they're like nature's composters.
Exactly, making the waste smaller and more manageable. But then, for the actual decomposition,
Yeah, what about that?
that's where the decomposers come in. These are mainly bacteria and fungi, and they work at a microscopic level, using chemical processes to break down the organic matter further.
So they're not eating the dead matter, they're like breaking it down into nutrients.
Exactly, and releasing those nutrients back into the soil.
So what happens to those nutrients then?
This process is called mineralization, where those broken down nutrients are released back into the ecosystem. And guess who benefits from this?
Let me guess. The producers, right? The
Okay.
plants.
You got it. They absorb these nutrients from the soil, which they then use to grow and make their own food, using energy from the sun.
So it's like a closed loop. The energy flows in one direction, but the nutrients are constantly recycled, reused. It's a beautifully efficient system. But hold on. If energy is being passed from one level to the next, does it all reach the top? Like, does a tiger get all the energy from the sun that was originally captured by the grass?
That's a great question, and it brings us to a crucial point. Energy flow is unidirectional. It travels in one direction, from the sun up through the trophic levels. And importantly, it's not perfectly efficient. Think of it like a leaky bucket.
A leaky bucket. What do you mean by that?
Well, at each trophic level, a significant portion of energy is lost as heat. It's not transferred perfectly to the next level, so when that zebra eats grass, it doesn't absorb 100% of the energy stored in that grass.
So even though the zebra is getting energy from the grass, some of that energy is escaping as heat.
Yeah, some of it is lost as heat during digestion and other processes.
And then the same thing happens when the lion eats the zebra.
Exactly. So this means that there's less and less energy available at higher trophic levels, which is why food chains are typically limited in length. There simply isn't enough energy to support more levels.
This makes me think of those laws of thermodynamics I vaguely remember from science class. Do those laws play a role in ecosystem energy flow?
Absolutely. The first law of thermodynamics states that energy can't be created or destroyed, only transformed from one form to another. Like, during photosynthesis, light energy is converted into chemical energy. But then the second law adds a twist.
Okay, what's the second law?
The second law of thermodynamics states that whenever energy is transformed, some of it is converted into a less useful form, usually heat,
Yeah.
which is then lost to the environment.
Ah, so that's why the leaky bucket analogy. Energy transfer isn't perfectly efficient because some is always lost as heat at each level. Wow, so we've got this intricate dance between energy flow, trophic levels, and these fundamental laws of physics. It's all starting to come together. But why is understanding all of this so important, especially, for those interested in the environment and the UPSC exams?
That's a great question, and it's definitely one we'll be exploring further. But let me just say that this knowledge isn't just for acing exams. It's about understanding how nature works, how human actions impact ecosystems, and ultimately how we can make informed decisions for a more sustainable future.
So before we got sidetracked there, we were talking about how understanding energy flow is not just about acing exams, but about understanding the delicate balance of nature. And for those prepping for the UPSC, this topic is like pure gold.
Absolutely. Ecosystem energy flow is like a thread running through the entire environment and ecology syllabus.
It's like a secret decoder ring for understanding how the natural world works. Okay, so let's zoom back in on those producers, the foundation of it all. We talked about plants, algae, and even some bacteria harnessing sunlight to make food.
Right, the photoautotrophs, the masters of photosynthesis. But there's another group of producers that might surprise you.
Oh, like what?
The chematotrophs.
Chematotrophs, that sounds pretty intense.
They're pretty incredible. These organisms thrive in environments where sunlight is scarce, like deep-sea hydrothermal vents.
Wow, those crazy zents.
Exactly. They use chemical energy from inorganic compounds to produce their own food.
So even in these dark, crazy places, life finds a way to make its own food. It's mind-blowing. But okay, let's move up the food chain to the consumers, the ones who can't make their own food.
Right, you've got your herbivores, the primary consumers, diligently munching on the producer.
Keeping those plant populations in check.
Exactly. Then you've got the carnivores, the secondary consumers, the predators who keep the herbivore populations balanced.
And sometimes we even have tertiary consumers, right? The top of the food chain predators. The carnivores who eat other carnivores.
Precisely. And each level plays this crucial role in regulating populations and maintaining the overall stability of the ecosystem. But remember that leaky bucket we talked about?
Yeah, the energy loss.
Right, that energy is lost at each trophic level, which limits the number of levels you'll find in a food chain. Imagine like trying to build a tower with blocks that keep getting smaller and smaller.
Yeah, you can only go so high.
Right, before it becomes unstable.
Makes sense.
So it's the same with food chains.
Okay, so the energy from the sun keeps getting diluted as it moves up the food chain. But what happens to all the organisms that die? Is that energy just lost?
Nope. That's where our decomposers and detritivores step back into the spotlight. They're not just the cleanup crew, they're the ultimate recyclers, making sure that the energy stored in dead organisms and waste products isn't wasted.
Ah, right. I remember we talked about the difference between them earlier. The detritivores are like the shredders, physically breaking down the dead stuff. And the decomposers work their magic at a microscopic level.
Exactly. The detritivores, like our earthworm friends, create smaller pieces of organic matter, making it easier for the decomposers to do their job.
Right, right.
And then those decomposers, the bacteria and fungi mostly, break those pieces down even further through mineralization.
Mineralization, that's where they release those essential nutrients back into the soil, right? Like nitrogen and phosphorus.
You got it, those building blocks that plants need.
So it's not just a linear flow of energy. It's this complex web of interactions
Exactly.
where energy flows in one direction, but nutrients are constantly being cycled and reused. It's beautiful, isn't it?
It really is. And understanding this intricate dance of energy and matter helps us appreciate the delicate balance of nature and the potential consequences when that balance is disrupted.
Speaking of disruption, how does human activity impact this delicate flow of energy? We've already talked about how important this knowledge is for the UPSC, but it's also crucial for understanding uh, the big picture of environmental conservation.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Right, we were talking about how human actions can sometimes mess with that energy flow in ecosystems.
Yeah.
It's kind of scary, but I guess understanding these impacts is really important, not just for the UPSC, but for like anyone who cares about the planet.
Absolutely. You know, when we mess with energy flow, whether it's through things like cutting down forests or polluting or even overfishing, it can really throw things off balance.
It's like if you take out a support beam from a bridge,
Exactly.
the whole thing becomes shaky.
The whole ecosystem becomes less stable, more vulnerable.
Right, makes sense. But hey, remember how we were talking about energy being lost at each level of the food chain?
Yeah, the leaky bucket.
Right. What does that mean for like feeding all the people on the planet, especially as the population keeps growing?
That's a really important question. Because remember, the amount of usable energy decreases as you go up those trophic levels.
So like it's more efficient to eat plants than meat because the energy hasn't had to travel as far up the food chain.
Exactly. When we eat plants, we're getting energy that's closer to the source, the sun, where there's the most energy available.
Okay, that makes sense. So hypothetically, if everyone went vegetarian or vegan, we could feed more people.
Well, it's not quite that simple because there are lots of factors involved, like cultural preferences, nutrition, and ethics. But yeah, the basic idea is that eating lower on the food chain is generally more energy efficient.
So it's all connected.
It is. The sun, producers, consumers, decomposers, it's like a giant puzzle.
Right. Each piece playing a role.
And understanding this puzzle is crucial for facing those big challenges like protecting the environment, making sure everyone has enough to eat.
And of course, for acing the UPSC.
Of course. This deep dive has given you a good foundation on ecosystem energy flow, and trust me, that's something you'll definitely see on the exam.
Definitely.
Just remember, don't just memorize facts. Make those connections, think critically, and you'll be all set.
Awesome. Well, this deep dive has been incredible. We've learned so much from the sun's core to those tiny decomposers, trophic levels, thermodynamics, even how to feed a growing planet.
It's amazing how much we've covered, right?
It is, and it just goes to show how fascinating and complex our planet is. And this is just the beginning. There's so much more to discover.
Absolutely.
So to all our listeners out there, whether you're studying for the UPSC, a student, or just a curious person, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep asking questions. And hey, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel and click the bell icon for more deep dives into awesome topics like this. Thanks for joining us.